morning, good afternoon, good evening. The Russian presidential election results are out. I have not been following it closely, but from the little I've been gleaning from the newspapers and the news, it didn't sound like a free, fair, and credible election, Benjamin.
Hello, thank you for having me, and to our viewers, thank you for joining us. Uh, I had a chance to, well, it's you just hear bits and pieces of it through headlines and news from other countries. Nothing much comes out from Russia itself, as I think information in there is closely held, and you cannot just broadcast news. But yeah, you are right to say that it doesn't even look close to a free and fair election, given also that main oppositions are 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 not allowed, weren't even allowed to participate. They shut the door down, put charges and different, you know, uh, tactics in there to stop any meaningful opposition from participating.
Well, one of the main one who was many believed was going to be his main challenger. Uh, he died in mysterious circumstances when a month ago.
Yes, that's true. And it's, I mean, it's unfortunately he met his demise, but for others it has been trumped up charges. So it's not, for Russia, I think it's not the first time that this has been happening. It's always like that when they head towards elections. Uh, it's it's not a fair. We cannot even call it a democracy when it comes to Russia. I think that day is evident, and everybody knows that.
Yeah. Well, one of the interesting aspect to this news item is that well, Zimbabweans were invited to witness the rigging, and none other than Zimbabwe's election commissioner, um, Justice Chikumba, was in Russia to witness the rigging. Birds of a feather, hey?
Oh yes, oh yes, that's true. Birds of a feather flock together. I mean, uh, it's not just the election part, but Zimbabwe is actually even siding with Russia against the war of Ukraine. So they, and we know that the Russians are sponsoring Zimbabwe in a lot of things. They are donating, for example, the helicopter ambulances that Zimbabwe is using are all donated from Russia. So they have to go there and then come back singing praises to say, this was the best election process ever witnessed, just to give it credibility so that at least the handouts can continue. It's a very sad day for democracy when you witness such events. I mean, somebody winning is 87%, that is close to 88%, and the nearest is only 3.86. I mean, surely, you know, I don't see any democracy. This will be likened to, ZANU PF contesting with their Pollard colleagues. They are just there to show as if democracy exists, but I mean, this is not democracy at all.
Yeah, I think it is important to maybe remind the listeners out there that Russia actually is very active in Zimbabwe. Uh, I understand that the Russians are in Marange and Chiadzwa for the diamonds, and they've definitely got quite a lot of mining concession for platinum. They've been very active in that area. And in most of these cases, it is important to understand that those mining concessions or agreements would have been drawn up the same way that ZANU PF has been drawing up these mining agreements with the Chinese, for instance, where there's not been the process has not been transparent, and there's not been competitive bidding, and invariably it will be you scratch my back and I scratch yours. So it'll be payment for some favor that the Russians would have done, just as much as the contracts that have been awarded to the Chinese would be in the same kind of spirit. And by the way, we are also very closely, with the ZANU-PF regime has got very close relationships with China. I think one of the main reasons for it is purely that the ZANU-PF knows that it doesn't hold free, fair, and credible elections. And countries like China and Russia, uh, particularly those two who are on the uh, Security Council, if the international community should try to, in any way, uh, censor ZANU-PF for rigging elections, those two countries would definitely veto it. And in fact, that has happened, or be it South Africa also sided with. They didn't want sanctions imposed on Zimbabwe for rigging the 2018 elections. So there we are. So we should not be surprised at all. And the tragedy is, of course, that a country like Russia, I think, when you compare it to all the other democratic Western countries, Russia has got enormous resources, and yet its people have remained poor. China had the same problem. Um, it's only in the last 30 years that the Chinese economy has really boomed, and the people standard of living, millions were pulled out of poverty. Uh, but because it is not a healthy and functioning democracy, China is always on the, it could easily backslide. And Russia itself, like I said, it's economically, it doesn't compete with any of its neighbors to the east and to the south, to the west, as we already know. It doesn't compete with Western Europe, and now it cannot even compete with China. And it's all because the Russians have failed to have a healthy and functioning democratic system of government. Putin is doing as he please, and this mandate, you will take it to be the mandate that he should continue with the war in Ukraine, and do as he please. It's tragic.
Yeah, it actually reminds me of, there was a video that I saw of the late Prime Minister of Britain, Margaret Thatcher, when she was talking about Russia with her enormous amount of wealth, in terms of minerals and agriculture, her soils and everything. And it kind of just reminded me of Zimbabwe, to say, with all those riches, you know, and then yet you find your own people are suffering within your country. It just shows or paints a picture to show that, without a functioning democracy, you can do all things to show off or whatever, but it's evident that democracy is lacking, and without democracy there's no accountability, there's no traceability, and your people, the citizens, always tend to suffer in such a, a setup. And like, for example, I believe Zimbabwe is in bed with Russia and China solely for protection and for advice. And when you said that it's you scratch my back and I scratch yours, I don't believe Zimbabwe is really being scratched. It's they're just scratching a few, just the top guys, by giving, for example, if ZANU-PF wants tractors, they get given tractors. And these tractors do not, go to everybody. It's just for the chefs. If they want money, to raise money for campaigns and to buy out, chiefs, for example, Russia will gladly do that. Not that they are helping ZANU-PF out, but no, they are protecting their investments. So it's not really you scratch me, I scratch you, but it's one-way traffic for me. I think most of these countries, they are just doing it to protect their investment, and at the end of the day, they should be laughing to say, we are getting some of these things for free, because there's nobody to be accountable to. As long as you just give them what they want, you can go maybe mine for 5 years, unlimited supply. So you find out it's Zimbabwe that is losing. At the end of the day, we the people are the ones to suffer. So from this relationship, I don't see anything positive that is coming out.
Well, I have often referred to George Orwell's book Animal Farm. For those who have not had the chance to read it, Animal Farm is actually was meant to reflect the Russian communist state, where Napoleon is the pig who leads the revolution or post-revolution there, was meant to be depicting Joseph Stalin and the mentality of the animals there, the personality cult, the belief Comrade Napoleon is always right, was meant to reflect that weakness within the Russian society. And I think George Orwell was right. The Russian Revolution never really delivered on its promise to deliver freedom, justice, equality for all. And I think this has been a fundamental problem with Russia. Whereas other revolutions, like the French Revolution, they did deliver. The ordinary person emerged out of the revolution a better person, in the sense that they had more rights, more freedom, and those in positions of power were accountable to the people. Whereas in Russia, the ruling elite became so dominant that they kept everybody else oppressed. And that has not changed. And in the case of Zimbabwe, we are a worse situation of Russia, actually. Our ruling elite, the level of corruption and mismanagement is over the top, you know. And when you look at the likes of Mnangagwa and before him Mugabe, you can see here is an individual to whom absolute power is the number one thing they care about. They don't care about anything else. And the ruling elite hunger for power and wealth is insatiable. And they are totally indifferent to the tragic suffering that they've brought on the masses. And that is also reflected in the book Animal Farm. I strongly recommend any of the listeners there who have not had a chance to read that book. It is important. In fact, I've been saying before that if there was to be change in Zimbabwe, I would say Animal Farm should become mandatory reading for those in secondary school and above, you know, because it teaches us so many lessons, and you know, the kind of election that we have had in Russia is typical of what you would get in Animal Farm, where everybody is coerced to vote in a certain way or you'll be in trouble. And that has been happening all over and over again. And it is a pity. And Zimbabwe is sending its election commissioners to witness that, you know, to learn the rigging from those who have been doing it for so long. Joseph Stalin is infamously known for saying that it is not the people who vote that count, it's those who count the vote that count. You know, in other words, what the masses say it's irrelevant. We'll tell them what the results should be. And I think that is what we are witnessing here. This is now the 21st century, and Russia is still failing to hold free, fair, and credible elections. It's failing to give that fundamental right to all its own people, the right to have a meaningful say in the governance of the country. That is the tragedy of Russia, but also equally true, the tragedy of Zimbabwe. Benjamin, you can say your closing remarks.
Well, in closing, I would just say, you know, it'll be. I'm looking forward to hear the comments from, you know, the election commission. Let's say Zimbabwe observer mission that has gone to go and, you know, watch over these elections, what they have to say. I'm positive I know what they will say, but you know, just to hear it from them and just, you know, show the world, you know, that this is firmly what Zimbabwe believes in, and they don't see anything wrong with what has just happened, you know, with this year Russian election. And I must say, you know, detectives always tend to side with one another. Well, they keep each other close, but not too close, because they themselves are actually, you know, fearful of each other, that one might outdo the other. So it's pretty sad for democracy, and you know, I feel sorry for the civilians, you know, both in Ukraine and in Russia, that are being subjected to this madness by some of these dictators. For example, him Putin. and others out there, that are subjecting, their people into such misery. So, in closing, I believe that we should be able to see the close relationship between Russia, countries like Russia, Belarus, and Zimbabwe. What are the similarities there? Why do they actually get along? You will find that there's a common detail. There's a common factor between them, which is that they are they are robbing their people of free will. And yeah, with that, that's how I would like to conclude it.
Thank you very much again, Benjamin, and thanks to the listeners, and good night.